Welcome to our Monday call. I'm excited today because you know how they have in Chinese, they have different years, year of the dragon, year of the whatever. And I think this is the year of Life Vantage. I don't know if anyone agree here? The year for Life Vantage. All right. Got a few of us. Anyway, I was just thinking that today, how awesome it is to be a part of this family. And I just look at the different faces here, even though some of it is just pictures. And I just feel like we're family. It's just an awesome, awesome thing. I want to share just a bit about signing up for Elite Academy. You may be like me in the beginning. I just didn't think Elite Academy was going to be worth it. And I went to my first one over 6 years ago. And you're going to meet people that you go, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And you're going to meet people there that are just like you. And then you're going to meet people that you think they're goofy or whatever. How could they ever do this business? And they do. They're pro nines or whatever. And so it can help you believe amazingly. And sometimes just one nugget is enough to change your life. And I remember going to Pro 5 Summit and something kind of dawned on me. I said, this multi-million-dollar corporation is flying me out to Utah. Maybe they believe something that I don't. Maybe they believe that there's something in me that I don't see, that they've done their research. They know that if you hit this level, that they're going to invest in you because they believe that you could make it to the top. And I thought that just kind of changed my whole thinking about this. And so those of you that are racing for Pro 5, definitely do that. It can be done. It's just multiplying your Pro 3s in organization. And just excited to have you guys here on the call today. The Success Mastery call was super good. If you didn't get to see that, be sure and see it when it comes out on the replay. Today we have the advantage of having Dr. Brian Dixon on with us, and I don't think I actually unmuted you yet, Dr. Dixon. But I think you can unmute yourself. But one thing I like about Dr. Dixon, just one of the things I like about him, is that he's like the guy next door. But he acts like that, but he's not. He's like, he was with Linus Pauling Research. He's not a stranger to NRF2 research, even before he came to Life Vantage. And he's the real deal when it comes to science, and he knows all the information, but he talks like and just acts like he's just your neighbor. And I really like that about him, and very humble guy. I'm glad he shaved his beard off. He looks a lot younger. It was just, having a chief science officer that looked older, Anyway, Brian, if you're on, can you unmute and take over for me? You're going to talk about our new product, Daily Wellness, and anything else you want to talk about today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and thanks for the kind words. I've been with LifeVantage, gosh, for it's going to be 2 years in July, and it's just been a wonderful experience. And to your point about us all feeling like family, I couldn't agree more. It's just the distributor base that we have and the culture that we have is so very unique in this industry, and I'm just so proud to be here.
One of the things that I was really excited about when this Daily Wellness first came out was the whole food fermenting, and I'd like you to talk about that a bit. Why does that excite you? Like Tara was sharing, before COVID hit, 2% of the people were interested in their immune health. After COVID hit, 22%. That's like a 2,000% increase. How about you, Dr. Dixon? What excites you about that?
Well, first, Rusty, you got to call me Brian. We're all friends here. Whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. Tara and I went through those numbers, and what she was talking about, I believe, was that in 2019, there was only a 2% increase in the immune space, and it's worth billions of dollars. And then in 2020, the market increased by, I believe, is 21% and that equated to about a $22 billion increase in immune cells. And when they went through and looked at the rankings of what were the top products in 2020, it was a multivitamin, vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc were kind of the top four. So just really interesting what's happened. And, if there's any positive to come out of 2020, maybe it's got us all thinking just a little bit more about our health. And I think also, too, when we're seeing who's been affected, nutrition and our overall health, our lifestyle, it's playing a major role. And I think um, we're seeing the results of that. So if we're proactive and taking care of our health, it's good in every aspect. There was just a study that came out that the countries who have been hit hardest were the countries that were also the fattest. So the most obese countries are the countries that have been hit the hardest. So just another reminder that one of the best things we can do for our overall health is just maintaining a healthy body weight. Just a couple of years ago, obesity overtook cigarette smoking as the number one cause of preventable disease, if you can believe that. So we all know how bad cigarette smoking is, but carrying around those few extra pounds isn't doing us any favors either.
I remember in physical therapy school, they were teaching us, some of these concepts and smoking was kind of in there. But I remember even back then, if you smoked and you ran, you exercised regularly, you're better off than someone who didn't smoke but didn't exercise. And I remember reading those studies way back then.
That Yeah, unbelievable. And exercise is another thing. I mean, yeah, exercise, eating your fruits and vegetables, the two best things we can do in our lifestyle. And I heard you say you just got out of the ocean and complaining about a cold winter day, but man, do you not have a lot of sympathy for me right now in a Utah winter? Jeez.
One of the things I was wondering is, when I first saw this come out, I saw the small amounts of the vitamins, so to speak, that were in here. If you look at that, how would you explain that to distributors? How we just explain that to our customers as to the benefit of, they look at, say, vitamin C, for example. Well, it's been recommended that we take more than that. How'd you pick that dosage in there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. That's probably the most common question that I've gotten when it comes to LifeVantage Daily Wellness. And I do have a presentation put together if we want to go through that, but I'm also fine with just a casual Q&A, whatever everyone would like to do. But specifically speaking to the amounts of nutrients that are in there, I think a lot of that's coming from the competition that's out in the marketplace. So, a lot of us, when we feel that little tickle in our throat, we'll run to the grocery store or the local drugstore, and we'll look for some of those over-the-counter nutritional products. And when you look at those levels, they're very, very high. I mean, in my opinion, insanely high. Maybe another point is they're also not meant to be a proactive approach. They're really a reactive approach. And what they're trying to do is really hit our immune systems with a sledgehammer. They're trying to boost your immune system. And I think a lot of us have heard maybe about adrenal fatigue. So if you're an extreme caffeine drinker, it can ultimately start to wear you down. And a similar thing happens with our immune system. You can overstimulate your immune system, but then eventually it gets fatigued and just has to calm down. A common ingredient that's in some of those over-the-counter nutritional products is echinacea. So echinacea is a great ingredient, but it's not meant to be taken for longer than 2 weeks for exactly this reason. So you get this overstimulation, and then your immune system just finally crashes. And if you take it much longer than 2 weeks, it starts to have the exact opposite effect that we want. So when it came to the design of the product, we were really thinking about this proactive approach and thinking about strengthening our immune system, if that makes sense, versus boosting. And it's maybe a little bit of a semantics and a fine line, but we want things to be ready when you need them and not in an overstimulatory fashion. So because one, this is meant to be taken every day, we were looking at what are the level of nutrients that we should be putting in a daily consumable product. Vitamins and minerals are a little bit unique to LifeVantage. I know we've shied away from them in the past. Many of you have heard me speak, and I'm a big proponent of a multivitamin. I take a multivitamin every single day. They're called essential vitamins and minerals for a reason. In biology, that word essential has a very specific meaning, and that is they're essential for life. And if we don't get them from our diet or a nutritional supplement, we will die. So we need these things, not as antioxidants per se, although they are, some of those are going to be having antioxidant effects, but mostly why we want them in there is for their essential vitamin roles and what they're doing to help support the various aspects of our immune system. But to speak to your question specifically, there's a couple of things that factored into our decisions and where we landed in the levels of nutrients. So one, meant to be taken every day. Two, we also needed to look across the product line, not what we have currently, but also what we have in development. So we have 2021 is going to be a year like never before at LifeVantage. So I know some of you are very much just want to be an NRF2 company. And I know others of you are like, yeah, let's increase this product portfolio. In my mind, I look at LifeVantage as a wellness company. And whether we're talking about wellness from a physical standpoint or whether we're talking about financial health, right? We're just wellness in every sense of the word. And I think if we're going to be a wellness company, we got to be pretty well rounded as well in our product portfolio. And I think there's some low hanging fruit, if you will, some things we can do to make people as absolutely healthy as possible. So not only were we looking at what we have in the product line currently, but also what's coming in the future. Okay. So safety is our primary concern. So we want to make sure, and we kind of have to assume that many of you are going to be taking a lot of the products that we make. So that was another consideration. But then the third was looking at the scientific literature and what does it tell us? And I might share my screen really quick, Rusty.
Yeah, we'd love to see your presentation, by the way, Dr. Dixon.
Yeah, I do have a formal presentation. We run
Yeah,
through it, but
yeah, we'd
I'll
love to see it.
just to maybe finish up on your question. I think this will illustrate the point nicely, especially when it comes to vitamin C. So this is a graph that I pulled from a publication early in Dr. Mark Levine's career. And if you've never heard his name before, Dr. Mark Levine is just instrumental in a lot of early, especially early vitamin C research. So this is an old paper, but it's considered to be the seminal work when it comes to vitamin C pharmacokinetics, which is a fancy way to say, how is vitamin C absorbed into our bodies? You might have also heard his name. He's really got a lot of attention in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, where he's been looking at, now this is in a clinical setting. You can never do this dietarily for a number of reasons, but he's looking at intravenous IV infusions to help treat some forms of cancer. So we're talking about being able to get vitamin C levels, I mean, wickedly high and way higher than we could ever get from any sort of dietary vitamin C. But this chart was the main decision point for the level of vitamin C. And again, remember, this is meant to be taken daily. So what he did was looked at a number of different vitamin C doses. So we can see those down here on the bottom, or the x-axis. And then he looked at the plasma or blood concentrations of vitamin C, and as they increase with various doses. So they started at 0 down here, then they looked at 10. And just to tell you how old this publication is, the RDA for vitamin C at that time was 30 milligrams per day. Right now it's 70 for women and 90 for men. So that brings us up here to 100 and 200. And somewhere right in here between 100 and 200, you reach a break point where these points are no longer statistically significant from each other. So even if you're taking as much as 2.5 grams of vitamin C, you see effectively no increase in your circulating vitamin C levels. And even though I'm a proponent of essential vitamin and mineral supplementation, what I'm not a fan of is mega dosing. So we wanted to find that sweet spot in the curve that we could get people's vitamin C levels as high as possible. But stay away from these like 2.5. I mean, here's a gram dose. I mean, just wickedly high doses of vitamin C. So basically, once you get over this 100 to 200 mark, no matter how much vitamin C you take in your diet, you're not going to increase your levels significantly higher. So that's some of the rationale, and it wasn't willy-nilly. We did dive into the scientific literature. Zinc we have in there at 10 milligrams. The RDA for zinc for women is 8, and for men, it's 11. Zinc works pretty similarly to echinacea. So it has what we call a very short therapeutic window. So, right, none is bad, too much is bad, but that window when it's going to provide a benefit is pretty narrow. So once you get above about 40 milligrams of zinc per day, there can start to be some serious consequences. And the main consequence is zinc and copper compete for the same transporters. Are the zinc levels that are required are orders of magnitude higher than copper. So really you start to shut down copper absorption, and then you'll start to suffer from a copper deficiency if you stay above 40 milligrams for a relatively, you know, decent period of time. You're going to have some problems there. Vitamin D we have at 5 micrograms. Now, if you've heard me talk, well, I should say too, I hate that the U.S. government made us switch over to micrograms. I'm still old school and prefer the international unit nomenclature. So 5 micrograms equates to 200 international units of vitamin D. Um, you know, that is one. And again, if you've heard me talk before, you know, the only place I believe in megadosing is with vitamin D. And Rusty, you might be surprised to hear that even in Hawaii, you might be surprised how many people are going to be vitamin D deficient. We got so afraid of the sun. We're putting on tons of sunscreen, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. We're wearing hats. We're wearing long sleeve clothing when we're at the beach or just outside during the day. I was part of a study that compared vitamin D levels in the summer and the winter. And we found that there was no difference summer to winter between people. The variance in the population definitely increased. So there were some people who were getting some responsible sun exposure and making their own vitamin D. But effectively, this myth that vitamin D is a sunshine vitamin really is a myth. Um, the thing about the vitamin D concentration, um, I do candidly wish it was a little bit higher. But this is an international formula, which is also pretty unique. So there was a couple of markets that constrained us by how much vitamin D we could put in the product. So for those of you who do have international businesses, I think you're going to be really happy that this is going to be one formula that's going to go internationally. We don't have to answer those questions anymore. Why is the US formula like this? Or why is the European formula like this? Or why is Australian formula like that? Um, but what I will say, excuse me, just a sec. What I will say is that I promise we're going to have you covered on vitamin D with the other products that came out. So looking at what is in the pipeline, we're going to be getting enough vitamin D into people. And with that, and also with that safety consideration in mind, we were okay with going with the 200 international units.
Can't wait to find out what those new things are. I know you can't share those with us today, but we'd love to see your presentation, Brian.
Yeah, you got it. Well, let me talk about what's probably the worst kept secret at LifeVantage these days, and that's daily wellness. I don't know how many people on here have had a chance to actually try it. I don't know if I saw you sipping on some a little bit earlier there, Rusty, but I think it just absolutely tastes amazing. And if you're not familiar for some reason what it is, it's a powder drink mix that comes in the little tub like we have there. I would say it's very similar to the Axio format, even though the formulas are completely different. So if you're used to Axio, it's a very similar formula. You can mix it in as much or as little water as you want to get the kind of the either the strong flavor, or if you like it a little bit more dilute, just add a little bit more water. But I think it tastes amazing. We landed on an acai elderflower flavoring. Tastes amazing. Again, because it's an international formula, we wanted to um, try to accommodate as many different palates as we could. So it's also, I would say, just a touch less sweet than maybe Axio is as well. And I think importantly, it's meant to be consumed daily. And I think the marketing and brand team did just an amazing job in naming this product with daily wellness. I mean, the name says it all. Again, it's meant to be proactive support instead of reactive. Um, it's obviously meant to support immunity, but with the ingredients we have in there, we also can make some overall health claims because of the product. And I think where I'm going to focus the attention on this presentation is specifically in the immune system. So The immune system is just absolutely fascinating. So I will warn everybody a little bit ahead of time that this is a pretty scientific presentation, but I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be a scientist to share it. I think this presentation gives a good overview of kind of where R&D's head was at when they were formulating the product and how we were thinking about it. Um, I also want this to just kind of give you that faith, if you will, that at LifeVantage, we pride ourselves on making these science-based products. So I'm going to go into all of the science just to kind of give you all of that background that goes into it. But if you're not familiar, the brand and marketing teams have put just a wealth of information into the playbook that are more consumer facing. So that's what I would encourage everybody to be sharing, especially. So if you haven't already, go to that playbook, download those materials, start to familiarize yourself. I mean, the official launch is this Saturday. So maybe start coming up with a game plan as well about how you're going to start sharing this product and get some people to utilize it. But let's talk about some of the science. Sit back. About 3/4 of it's going to be pretty scientific. I'll try to keep the science jargon toned down, but then we'll kind of spend the last quarter or so of this presentation specifically talking about daily wellness and why it's so amazing. So I love definitions. If you ever see me present, I almost always start with the definition. The technical definition of our immune system is a coordinated system of cells, proteins, and chemical signals designed to keep us as healthy as possible. And what we don't really appreciate, in my opinion, is how many roles in our body our immune system plays. So I think normally we think of the immune system as, trying to be our guardians, if you will. But our immune system plays a number of roles. It especially helps with cellular and tissue turnover and regeneration. And the best analogy that I can give is if I were to get just a little cut on my finger, that wound healing process, right? This natural, healthy process that occurs in all of us is really facilitated by our immune system. So once we get that little cut on our finger, it's the immune system job to go there. And the first course of action is to clean up all of those damaged and dead cells that are a result of that cut. So first it has to clean up all of the damage, if you will. But then through a series of about 5 steps, the immune system ultimately triggers the surrounding skin cells to grow and divide and then slowly slow that wound. Just absolutely fascinating. But like I said, where I'm going to spend the majority of my talk is how we traditionally think of the immune system. So there are technically 3 parts of our immune system. And forgive me, this is a little bit jargony. I couldn't think of another way to say it, but in at least scientific circles, it's what they're known as. The first part of our immune system is known as the innate immune system. I like to think of it as being a really kind of archaic part of our immune system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But even though it's archaic and works in a little bit of a crude manner, it is so important to our immune system. The cells of our innate immune system are really the first responders. They're the first individuals on the scene. And then compare and contrast that with the adaptive, or even it's called acquired part of our immune system. This is a really highly advanced part of our immune system and works with a lot of specificity. In fact, there's even memory that's built into this part of our immune system. And I don't know if anybody's old enough to have ever gone to chickenpox parties, but my mom and dad stuffed me around a bunch of kids that had chickenpox when my brother and I were pretty young, and they wanted us to get chickenpox. Well, you only tend to get chickenpox once in your life, and that's because this part of our immune system has that memory capacity built in. But then there's a third, and probably you could even argue the most important part of our immune system. And would anybody guess what that might be? It's staring you right in the mirror. So again, scientifically, it's known as the barrier system, but it's our skin. Our skin is the primary defense, if you can believe that. And I like to think of it as almost being like the walls of a castle. So the taller, the thicker the walls of that castle are, the easier it is to defend off the enemies trying to get in. And so remember, I talked about how your immune system can be overwhelmed. So if we can lower the burden on what the immune system actually has to do, we're all just better off in the first place. But when I say barrier system, it's not just our skin. We effectively have another layer of skin that lines our entire digestive system. And so this becomes incredibly important because if you think about it, that part of our immune system, right, the upper part's exposed to the air that we breathe, and then the upper and lower part of our digestive system is exposed to all the things we're putting in our mouths and all that stuff that's coming along with our food. So we need to keep that barrier part of our immune system strong as well. So we're obviously talking about gut health as well. So let's talk about these three parts of our immune system. So let's start with the barrier function. I don't know that it needs a lot of explanation. I think that castle analogy really kind of says it all. We just want a strong, tightly packed layer of skin that's going to keep the outside world out and the inside world in. But then as we transition into the innate and adaptive immune system, things start to get really, really complex. And I'm not going to walk through this slide. I put this schematic on this slide to illustrate the point. One, how complex it is. Two, there are a number of different cells within our immune system. But what I think is the most fascinating on this schematic is that no matter what type of cell an immune cell is going to become, it all originates from a single stem cell. Okay, so early on, when that stem cell first divides, that daughter cell has to make the decision, what type of immune cell do I want to become? So this process in science is known as differentiation, but it's really the decision-making process that the cell has to go through so that it can become any one of these number of cells. And this becomes important because ultimately, when we're talking about a healthy immune system, balance is key. So we want to make sure we get the right populations of these different immune cells. So remember that word differentiation. It's going to come up again when we talk about the ingredients. And again, I'm guilty of it. We like to talk about these two parts of our immune system, the innate and adaptive immune system, as being very, very discrete. But in fact, there's a ton of communication that's going on between these two parts of our immune system. I talked about the innate part of our immune system being the first responders. Well, once they get on the scene, they have to radio back to the adaptive part of our immune system that, hey, there's something going on here. You guys need to respond as well. And then there's even cells that kind of walk this weird middle ground that kind of go back and forth between that innate and adaptive part of our immune system. So a ton of coordination is involved in our entire immune system. I mentioned that I think of our innate immune system as being really kind of crude and ancient. And I have a pretty grandiose analogy here on the screen, but it's not that far off with how these cells are actually working. So just like an atomic bomb, when it goes off, for some radius around that bomb, everything around it is going to be affected. And these cells of our immune system are working in that very similar way. And this becomes important when we start talking about the health of the cells of our innate immune system, but also our own cells. So our own host cells and tissues. Compare and contrast that to the specificity that comes from the adaptive part of our immune system. Forgive me for sticking with a war analogy, but these are really kind of like the snipers of the immune system. They're very precise in what they do, very targeted, and they know who they're looking for and what they're going to do. Now, so those are kind of the cells, and I just glimpsed on some of the proteins involved, but something that's so interesting are the chemical signals that go on throughout the immune system. And, at LifeVantage, we love to talk about cell signaling, chemical signals, binding to receptors, nutrigenomics, activating cell signaling, flipping the switches on genes. But so much of that is also happening within our immune system. And when we start talking about the ingredients, we're going to talk about some of the nutrigenomic ways that some of these nutrients are working to help keep our immune systems as healthy as possible. But let's talk for just a second on this chemical signaling. We see this throughout nature. I mean, ants are following these chemical trails. The first ant to find some water or food will kind of drag drag her tail and lay down a pheromone trail, and she'll come back to the nest, and then the other ants will go, oh, she found food or she found water, and so they'll follow her trail back to whatever it is they're foraging for. And so these chemical trails become really important for her sisters to go to the food source, bring it back to the nest. um, just very common throughout nature. Maybe something that's a little less familiar of an analogy, but I have a really um, unique degree in entomology, so insects, I guess, are always close to my heart. But if you're not familiar with how butterflies and moths mate, it's pretty fascinating. So a female moth or butterfly will go high in a tree somewhere, and she'll land, she'll start fluttering her wings and secreting out pheromones, and it kind of puts out a little smoke trail, if you will. The male moth or butterfly is really uniquely equipped to be able to smell that pheromone signal, and he will start following that trail based on density back to that female. So the male find his way to the female, and eventually they'll make little baby butterflies. But this is also happening within our immune system. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen your immune system work. It's just absolutely fascinating. And one thing I always try to do in these kinds of presentations is make the invisible visible. So, we always talk about the immune system and all these things going on, but have you actually ever seen it work? So here, what they've done is taken a microscope slide. So this is under a microscope. They've put a bunch of different cells from our immune system down, and then they put a little tiny microscopic worm down. And what you're going to see, and I'll draw your attention to the bottom and kind of middle part of that worm. What you're going to see is eventually some of those cells are going to recognize that that worm probably shouldn't be there. Those immune cells are going to start secreting chemicals that are going to draw in a number of other immune cells. So watch our immune system at work. So isn't that pretty fascinating? I've got one more little video or reenactment, if you will, of how our immune system's working. So this is something similar. The scientists put some blood on a microscope slide. So let me orientate everybody on what's going on here. So there's that big, really kind of weird shaped cell in the upper left hand corner. I don't know if it's a bell laying on its side or maybe a ghost flying through the air, but that's one of our white blood cells. And then we have those darker, more round cells on the microscope slide. Those would be our red blood cells. And then what the scientists did in this reenactment was put a bacteria on the microscope slide. And what you're going to see is that white blood cell is going to chase down that bacteria around this slide. So this would be a member of our innate immune system. And remember, I said they're the first responders, or really the hunters of the group. So watch some of your white blood cells at work. So it's moving, changing directions, and it's doing all of that because it can literally smell the bacteria running around that slide. And then look, it's going to completely change directions 90 degrees. And then eventually it engulfs it and does what immune cells do. I mean, how cool is that? So back to some science and some really easy biochemistry. I'm kidding. I'm not going to walk through this, but the point I want to make with this slide is that there's some really unique biochemistry that's going on inside of our immune cells, right? Again, at LifeVantage, we're really good at talking about free radicals and oxidants. So that's almost everything you see on here are free radicals and oxidants. And remember how I showed that analogy of a nuclear bomb? A lot of these compounds on this schematic are the same compounds that are produced during a nuclear explosion or even a nuclear reaction. So this is especially how the cells of our innate immune system are working. But if I can draw your attention to the lower left-hand side of the schematic, I want to point out a few compounds. And while you might not recognize their chemical structures, you might recognize their common names. So if I start at the very bottom there, that compound that says HOSCN, well, anywhere you see CN in biology or chemistry, that's a cyanide containing compound. Okay. So I think we all know about cyanide and how bad that can be. If we go straight up from there, there's a compound called H2O2. Anybody know what that might be? It's hydrogen peroxide. And then if we go straight to the left of hydrogen peroxide, there's a compound HOCl. Anyone know what that might be called? Well, scientifically, it's hypochlorous acid, but also known as common everyday bleach. So if we get a little cut on our finger, what do we use to clean it? Hydrogen peroxide. What are we cleaning our countertops with these days? Bleach. Well, our cells, our immune cells, can make these same compounds, and that's how they work. Now, what is so important here is these are non-discriminate. Okay, so not only are they working like the immune cell wants them to work, but they can also negatively affect our own host cells and tissues. So we do need to start talking about protection. And there's also some interesting pathways that immune cells have to be able to protect themselves from these free radicals and other oxidants. So if you look right over there by that H2O2 or hydrogen peroxide, there's a compound, if you see there, SOD. Do we talk about SOD every once in a while here at LiveVantage, right? Superoxide dismutase. Yeah, absolutely. So immune cells also need to protect themselves from these very same compounds. And we also need to be thinking about protecting our own cells as well. So this is where some antioxidant protection can really work in our favors. So I think we all know that our immune system can be turned on and off, literally like a light switch. But this is a pretty simplistic view of what our immune system is doing. Because in reality, our immune system is always a little bit on and a little bit off all at the same time. Now, that balance might shift just a little bit, right? And that's a normal, healthy, balanced response. What we don't want are things moving too far one way or another. I mean, if our immune system's completely off, that's a problem. And if it's completely on, that's a problem as well. So we're really kind of walking this fine line. And what we really need to be thinking about is maintaining this healthy, balanced response. So if we bring that back to those three systems of our immune system, we need to be thinking about this healthy, balanced response for our skin and our gut, for our innate immune system, and our adaptive immune system. So this is where you start to see how we started thinking about formulating this product in R&D. So really what we're talking about is supporting our gut and skin health. We do need to be thinking about antioxidant protection, both for the cells of our immune system, but also our own cells. And then there's some really cool and clever things we can do to help support immune cell growth, differentiation, that decision-making process about what type of immune cell are you going to become, their activation, and their efficiency. So in looking at that, we came up with 5 ingredients. And, these are really what I call the immune system greatest hits. There are 5 ingredients in LifeVantage Daily Wellness, and you're going to see this theme throughout the life of LifeVantage Daily Wellness, and that's 5 to thrive. So a really easy way to remember that there are 5 ingredients in the product. And I like to break them down into 2 general categories, and that is those essential vitamins and minerals, and then we have kind of an additional nutritional support. So let's first talk about these essential vitamins and minerals. The first is vitamin C. Like you and I were talking, Rusty, we have it in there in 150 milligrams, and it's in there for 2 reasons. One is antioxidant protection. We can let's talk about this afterwards, maybe, Rusty, but we'll talk about vitamin C and antioxidant protection versus like indirect antioxidants like catalase and SOD. But one reason we wanted to have some vitamin C in there is because of its antioxidant protection effects, and especially as it relates to our immune cells. So it turns out certain cells of our immune system very specifically want high concentrations of vitamin C inside of it. If you're not familiar with how vitamin C is regulated, it has to be actively transported across a cell membrane. And vitamin C looks a lot like glucose. So the transporters are very much related. So these cells of our immune system have a really high concentration of these vitamin C transporters and want to concentrate vitamin C inside of themselves. In fact, these cells of our immune system have vitamin C concentrations that range between about 100 times to 1,000 times higher than the levels that would be circulating inside of our blood. So, in biology, they say nothing is there by accident. So if these cells want it, we should probably give it to them. So that's the antioxidant property of vitamin C. But then vitamin C, and more speaking towards its essential roles, and there's just a couple listed here. But if you're not familiar, vitamin C is absolutely required to make some neurotransmitters. It's absolutely required to make energy. So we know that there's a huge energy demand when our immune system is working. So we want to make sure we're providing as much energy as possible. But where vitamin C really shines as it relates to immune cell function is it's helping with cellular division and differentiation. So it's helping them trigger to divide, but then it's also helping in that decision making process. Another requirement of vitamin C is to make collagen. So if you're not familiar with what collagen is, it's really like that glue that's holding many of our cells together. Okay, so this becomes especially important when we start talking about our skin health. So collagen is the main glue that's holding together our skin cells. So vitamin C is helping protect that barrier function. Next, we have vitamin D. Vitamin D is an essential vitamin, but vitamin D isn't acting like a traditional vitamin. A lot of vitamins are acting, I guess, in metabolic and physiological pathways. They're being consumed and helping all of that chemistry that needs to go on inside of our cells go on. Vitamin D isn't working that way. It's working more like a hormone. In fact, it's been hypothesized that vitamin D is the oldest hormone on the face of this earth. Vitamin D has been shown to regulate over 2,000 different genes inside of our DNA. In fact, that's a pretty big percentage of genes that are regulated by vitamin D. And many of those genes are directly involved in our immune responses. So, vitamin D is helping to support, especially the cells of our innate and adaptive immunity. And the next is zinc. Zinc is an interesting metal or mineral, however you want to talk about it. It does work as an antioxidant, and zinc can work both as a direct antioxidant and an indirect antioxidant. And that indirect aspect of zinc becomes incredibly important when it comes to SOD or superoxide dismutase. There are three general families of SOD, and the one thing that all three of those families have in common is they all require zinc to work. So if you don't have zinc around, SOD isn't going to be working as an antioxidant. And in fact, it's been shown that if SOD is missing zinc, it actually works in the opposite direction and will generate free radicals and oxidants. So we want to make sure that there's enough zinc around that we can meet the requirement of especially SOD for its indirect function. Zinc, again, is super interesting. It assimilates with no fewer than 300 different enzymes and has been shown to associate with somewhere around 1,000 different proteins. So it plays just an incredibly diverse role inside of our bodies and especially in our immune system. So because of all of these diverse roles, we know it's going to help support the cells of our innate, adaptive, and even our skin and our gut. So those are the essential vitamins and minerals. The second general class of compounds in LifeVantage Daily Wellness are what I like to call nutritional extracts. So we have elderberry that's in there at 200 milligrams of really interesting compound. It has literally been used for centuries to treat just about everything under the sun, including supporting immune health. The reason it's so potent when it comes to immune health is it's providing a number of different compounds. So it's providing more essential vitamins and minerals, more antioxidants, phytonutrients that can be acting as antioxidants or working nutrigenomically to help activate certain things inside of immune cells. And I don't have a ton of time to go into it today, but one class of compounds that elderberry has that's so interesting are something called anthocyanins. And anthocyanins have been shown to be intimately involved in our immune response. So maybe if you're a little bit of a nerd like me, I might encourage you to read just a little bit more about anthocyanins. And then in my mind, what I really think is the hero ingredient of LifeVantage Daily Wellness is a whole yeast or whole food ferment. And we have it in there at 500 milligrams. And that 500 milligram dose is incredibly important because this ingredient has been studied extensively in the scientific literature. So there are 7 preclinical studies on this ingredient, and there are 8 clinical studies on this ingredient. And what's so great about that 500 milligram dose is that's exactly the dose that was used in those 8 human clinical trials that have been done. I'm going to come back to that first bullet point in just a second. But what is so interesting about this whole yeast or whole food ferment is it's technically considered a postbiotic. So if you've ever seen me present on the microbiome, you know, I make you learn 3 words. That's prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic. Um, Prebiotic is really the food for our microbiome. Probiotic are the actual organisms, the healthy organisms we want to be living in our digestive system. And then postbiotic is really kind of a clever little trick that's relatively new in the microbiome world. So what we can do are grow up certain organisms on certain foodstuffs. And as these healthy organisms are eating and digesting this food, they're producing a number of metabolites. So one reason why a healthy microbiome inside of our gut is so healthy is the metabolites that they're making for us. Those metabolites are working on the microbiome. They're working on that 70 to 80% of immune cells that live inside of our digestive tract. Um, but they're also getting into circulation and having effects all over our body, again, working nutrigenomically. So that's exactly the case with this whole yeast or whole food ferment. We are gathering a whole bunch of different metabolites and we're giving them as a postbiotic. And when they analyze this postbiotic, they see a number of different compounds from proteins to polyphenols. These are generally considered to be antioxidants, more vitamins and minerals, amino acids, polysaccharides or complex carbohydrates, and a bunch of fiber as well. But then if we start talking about beta glucans, these also become really, really interesting and are working nutrigenomically with our immune system. So these beta glucans get into our digestive tract. They start to be eaten upon by some of these healthy probiotics, and those metabolites make it into circulation and will actually bind to receptors on certain populations of immune cells to basically raise them and bring them to kind of a heightened state. And the analogy I like is that there's almost 2 locks on the outside of an immune cell. And this priming mechanism is really like unlocking that first lock so that immune cell can more quickly come to a fully activated state when it needs. So just a number of health benefits from this whole yeast or whole food ferment. So those are the 5 ingredients. And again, what I want you to remember here is that 5 to thrive. Okay. 5 to thrive: vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, elderberry, and this fermented yeast or whole food extract. Important. So I'm going to put on my legal hat here. Please, 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 everybody, just stay away from this pandemic that's going on. We can't be making COVID claims. We can't be making viral claims or bacterial claims. Maybe I took some liberties early on, just showing you how that immune system's working. But the regulators aren't going away. They're watching this space incredibly closely. So please stay away from all of that. We don't need to go there because our regulatory and compliance team have allowed us to say 5 very powerful claims legally as it relates to LifeVantage Daily Wellness. So let's talk about these 5 legal claims that you can make, and I think you'll see why we don't need to go there. Okay. So first is it boosts our body's responses to stress. So what do I mean there? So I mean that the ingredients are almost working like an adaptogen, if you've ever heard of that term. Um, Generally, adaptogens make us more resilient to stresses of all types. It can be physical stress, it can be mental stress, whatever. So we can make that claim that it boosts our body's response or resilience to stresses of all types. It's going to support everyday health and well-being. Another wonderful claim. And again, because of those beta glucans, the fiber, and some of those other nutrients in the elderberry and the fermented yeast extract, it's going to help with our microbiome. And we all know how important that is for overall health. But then look at these last two claims, these legal compliant claims we can make. It's going to support respiratory and sinus health. I mean, what else do we need to say? And then if we look at that last claim, improves your immune response. What else do we need to say? It's just amazing. And again, just like every other product we have, the compliance and legal team have put together a document back in the playbook about everything we can and can't say about LifeVantage Daily Wellness. So again, if you haven't come across that, make sure you read it, understand it. There's a lot of wonderful things in there that we can say. So with that, Rusty, I think that's all I had in terms of slides. It kind of ran a little bit long, but appreciate you all having me on today.
Thank you so much. That was really a blessing. There's tons of questions. I'm going to ask just one because it's over time, but they want to know if hot or cold makes a difference.
Yeah, it wouldn't. And I can stay on till 4. I've got another show I've got to jump onto at 4. So I'm happy to stick around as long as you can. Does hot or cold make a difference? And I would say no. I would stay away from maybe something that's boiling hot. But vitamin C is an incredibly stable nutrient. Vitamin D is even more stable. I mean, metals, you're not going to do anything to a metal and the zinc that's in there. And then again, a lot of those compounds, the polyphenols, the vitamins and minerals that are in the elderberry and that fermented yeast extract should all be really, really stable. Like I said, I wouldn't get scalding hot, but a nice, comfortable tea temperature, I think would be perfectly fine.
Julia asks about the copper, zinc. She wants to know, clarify, give her information on that. Can you take them together? Should it be taken together? Those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can get bogged down in the minutia. We need zinc at orders of magnitude higher than we need copper. I mean, if you wanted to be incredibly scientific about it, you might want to separate zinc and copper, just so kind of let the copper absorption go on and then let the zinc absorption go on, or vice versa. But again, if my fear is by giving these really complex scientific rationale, I think people start to get paralyzed and like, oh my gosh, I can't take it now because I just took that. You still will be absorbing zinc and copper, even if they're both around at the same time. But when you start to get into that 40 or so milligram dose per day of zinc, that's when you start to swamp out all of the transporters that are there. And that's where you'll run into an issue. So don't overthink it. It's okay to take NAD at the same time as LifeVantage Daily Wellness, for example. Just don't overtake it. Products don't do any good in the bottles.
Susan's asking, could you make liken prebiotic or postbiotic to the compost for the soil? And if probiotics are like seeds and the prebiotics are fertilizers, that
It's a wonderful analogy. Yeah, I love it.
Okay. I'm gonna unmute if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask.
It's funny. It's funny because a lot of probiotics are actually given in spore form. So that's literally the equivalent of a bacterial seed. So it's a great analogy.
I have a question. So I remember, and I've also mentioned this to other people, that Dr. McCord said that the immune system that we actually boost with protandem is far superior to vitamin D and vitamin E. How can we reconcile that now in recommending vitamin D to people when, before we said we don't really need it anymore?
Okay, so it's a good question, and probably the second most the most common question I've received. for the longest time, the tagline was "Make them, don't take them." Right. The thing is, I don't disagree with Dr. McCord that let's say SOD or catalase is far more efficient at working as an antioxidant than vitamin C, vitamin E, and some of the others. Um, it's not an either or situation though. So what we're talking about is just kind of overall antioxidant protection. So for example, I mentioned the immune cells that specifically want to accumulate vitamin C. So we're trying to support those immune cells the best we can. And just because we're taking vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc does not mean that the protandem line is still not going to be working like it used to. An interesting scientific history lesson. I don't know if anybody knows how NRF2 was first discovered. And it was first discovered because antioxidants activate NRF2. So we talk about NRF2 being released. It ultimately makes it into the nucleus. It binds to the DNA and flips these switches, right? The sequence of DNA that NRF2 binds to is called the ARE, or the antioxidant response element. So more than anything, what I would guess would happen is that you're going to see a further increase in NRF2 activation by taking some of these antioxidants together. And just the most important point I want to drive home is it's not an either or. So if you have vitamin C around, it doesn't mean you're not getting NRF2 activation. And again, what we're talking about is just more a global protection, and let's get as many molecules as we can around to help fight this free radical and oxidative stress.
I had a question. Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon, for being here today and answering all these questions for us. And I know
I'll answer your question if you call me Brian.
Okay, Brian. I know a lot of us are wondering about whether it's safe to give to our children, and if there's a different dosage level that we should take into consideration based on age or weight, or, especially if we're giving them the activators or the NRF2.
Well, I think you'll know what I have to say. So I have to toe the company line here, and we don't recommend products for anybody under 18 years of age right now. The main reason for that is there just hasn't been a lot of studies done on children. So I have a pretty extensive background in human clinical studies, and to get those studies approved, you have to go through what's known as an institutional review board, or an IRB. And their primary concern is that there will be no harm done to the subjects in the study. And it is almost impossible to get a study approved that involves either children or pregnant or breastfeeding women. So the reason we err on that conservative side is for that reason. For better or worse, we're a conservative company. I think it's a good thing all in all, because I love my job and I want to keep it, and it also helps protect your businesses as well. So that's the answer I have to give. What I can give you for advice is print out labels, especially for daily wellness. Go to your pediatrician and just ask him or her, like, hey, is it okay if my kid takes this? And if they do say yes, then I might modify the dose just a little bit on a body weight basis. So work with your doc, should be fine.
Thanks, Brian. I know it's coming up on the 4 o'clock for you, so we're gonna let you go. And I really appreciate your time with us. And I just want to say that you grew your beard back again. Apparently, I didn't even notice that.
It comes and goes. I kind of have that Homer Simpson kind of shave it and it pops right back. But I'm about due for a shave. My daughter just reminded me, so I'll take it off for you. We'll be twins here in no time, Rusty.
Okay. And we also want to remind you guys that next week, those of you that live on the mainland, if you don't live in Arizona, you're going to be an hour different. So just check on the time. I think it's an hour later, right, for you guys?
Spring forward. So
So
I'm terrible at math, Rusty. Don't put me on the spot. But you're right. It is daylight savings time this week. So yeah, don't get don't miss it by an hour. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And again, I just like to remind everybody too about all those materials that are in the playbook. If you haven't seen them, there's a wealth of information there. Don't forget about it. Start getting ramped up for the official launch here on the 13th. And I just wish everyone the most success. And I hope everyone's excited about LifeVantage Daily Wellness as we are. So.
And are you speaking a bit on the on our EA Elite Academy?
Well, Rusty, that's funny. My 4:00 meeting is to go through that show. So I don't know if I'm speaking or not.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for your time. I know everyone here appreciated the chat was going off on all kinds of stuff. So we really appreciate your time and effort. And I wish we were meeting in person, but someday soon.
I think it's coming. Rusty, wonderful to see you. Wonderful to see everyone on the call, and appreciate everyone taking time out of their day. So all the best, everybody.
All right.
Thank you. Aloha.
Cheers.